I could have said nothing. I could have just walked past them, taken my seat by the fire pit, poured a drink, and watched the retreat carry on. Let them enjoy their expensive wine and their curated joy. Let them believe they had buried the past beneath 10 years of luxury, silence, and champagne-colored lies. But I didn't. Because the moment she turned her head and saw me, really saw me, something inside her cracked. She didn't recognize me at first. I'd lost weight, grew the beard, swapped the cheap glasses for lenses, and gave up on trying to look younger. I guess a decade of humiliation, bitterness, and quiet rebuilding will do that to a man. Her smile froze. Then her hand tightened around his wrist. His. Beckett. They were still together. My ex-fiancée and my former best friend, united by betrayal, held together by arrogance. And now they were 3 steps away from me. We were all gathered at a wellness retreat for elevated thinkers and resilient leaders, whatever that was supposed to mean. I didn't pick the venue. My wife, Everly, did. She said we needed space, clarity, and a digital detox. I agreed because, well, I usually just agree. That's who I am. But what I didn't expect was them. At the same retreat. Same week. Same courtyard. And I definitely didn't expect the moment when Everly walked up behind me, slid her arm through mine, and kissed my cheek. She didn't know who they were. Yet. But they knew who she was the moment she said, in that soft, confident voice of hers, "Sorry I'm late, honey. I had a session. Did you grab me a chamomile?" I heard Beckett choke on his drink. Delaney's face, the woman who once promised to grow old with me, turned a shade I can only describe as punishment. I didn't say a word. Just looked her in the eyes as my wife leaned on me, completely unaware that the woman staring daggers into her had once left me at an altar with nothing but a hotel bill and a voicemail that started with, "You deserve better. I just can't be that for you." She couldn't be that for me. But apparently she could be his. That night at the fire circle, everything unraveled. Slowly, painfully, deliciously. And I wish I could tell you I was graceful, composed, full of inner peace. But the truth is, I was a mess inside. Because what they didn't know, what no one at that retreat knew, was that I had come with a box. A small wooden box I hadn't opened in 10 years. And I planned to open it that weekend. In front of them. And let the contents finally speak. Because not everything they did to me stayed in the past. Some wounds don't scar. Some wounds wait. I didn't bring the box to cause drama. That's the part no one believes when I tell them what happened. I didn't come to this retreat to humiliate anyone or seek revenge. If anything, I wanted closure. Or maybe I wanted to remind myself that I survived it all, that even after getting shattered like cheap glass, I managed to piece together something real. But when Delaney saw that wooden box on the table between us the next morning, her entire demeanor shifted. She walked by slowly, with Beckett 2 steps behind her like a well-trained dog, and she tried to mask it with a smile, but her eyes betrayed her. Her glance flicked down to it, and for the first time since I'd seen her, she looked nervous. The irony is, the box wasn't even locked. It wasn't some secure vault or sealed envelope of secrets. It was just wood, sanded smooth, no label, no initials. But she knew. She absolutely knew what was inside, or rather, what might be. Because the box wasn't a threat. It was a mirror. One that could reflect back everything they tried to erase from their perfect little world. The retreat schedule said we had a guided circle session that morning. Radical honesty, they called it. Everyone had to bring something personal, symbolic, something that represented a moment of fracture in their past. The therapist, a woman named Marva who wore linen like it was armor, told us this was the heart of the healing experience. Everyone else brought pebbles, dried flowers, drawings. Beckett brought a gold coin, said it represented his addiction to control. Delaney brought a worn journal and claimed it was full of pages she'd written to her inner child. And me? I brought the box and didn't say a damn word when it was my turn. I just set it on the rug, folded my hands, and looked across the circle at the 2 people who had once gutted my life and smiled about it. Silence. Then Marva asked, "Curtis, would you like to open it?" I said no. Not yet. The truth was, even I didn't know exactly what I was waiting for. Maybe I wanted them to sweat a little. Maybe I needed to see if they'd break the silence themselves. But instead, Delaney spoke up to the whole group. She said, with that voice of hers that used to sound like home, "Sometimes, things don't end the way we want them to. But that doesn't mean we didn't love deeply. And sometimes, forgiveness is the key to growth." Everyone nodded. It was the kind of vague, spiritualized wisdom people clap for. But I could hear it. The crack in her tone. The way her throat tightened right before she finished the sentence. Beckett looked at her like he didn't know whether to be proud or terrified. My wife, Everly, sat next to me with her hand on my knee. She still didn't know the full story. She knew I'd been left at the altar. She knew there was betrayal. But she didn't know it was them. Not yet. I hadn't told her because, honestly, I wasn't sure how. How do you explain to your current partner that the two people sitting across from you once rewrote your entire future without blinking? That they didn't just betray you, they erased you? Later that night, after the session, Everly asked me why Delaney had looked at me like she was afraid of what I'd say. I just shrugged and told her I'd explain everything when the time was right. Then I took the box to the fireplace lounge, placed it on a side table, and walked away. I watched from a distance, behind the indoor plants, not proud of it. But I needed to know. And sure enough, within 10 minutes, Delaney walked in. She sat down, alone, stared at the box for a long time. I could see her hand twitching near it, like she wanted to open it, but didn't dare. She whispered something under her breath. I couldn't hear what, but the look in her eyes told me enough. She remembered everything. Every word, every lie, every decision. I wasn't just a ghost from her past. I was the chapter she tried to burn. But some fires don't destroy. Some preserve. And I was still here. What she didn't know was that tomorrow, during the second circle session, I would open the box. And what was inside would make sure everyone saw them for who they really were. Not as spiritually awakened partners on a journey, but as architects of something they never expected to crumble. The next morning began in silence. Not the kind of peaceful quiet you enjoy over coffee, but the kind that drags its fingernails across your spine. Everyone at the retreat was moving slower, more deliberate, like they could feel something coming but didn't know what. Even the air felt heavier, like the sky was leaning in to listen. The circle was scheduled for 9, and at 8:57, I stood in the doorway, holding the box in both hands. I wasn't shaking, but I wasn't steady either. The weight wasn't physical. It was history, dense, clinging, unresolved. I wasn't bringing a box into that room. I was bringing ghosts. When I entered, they were already seated. Beckett sat with one ankle resting on his knee, that smug, performative calm he always wore when he needed to seem harmless. Delaney was beside him, hands clasped in her lap, her knuckles slightly white, trying to look serene but forgetting how easily I could read her tells. I took a seat across from them, placed the box in front of me, and nodded once at Marva. She gave a small, neutral smile, clearly unaware of what was about to unfold, and said softly, "Curtis, if you're ready, we're here to hold space for you." I didn't look at anyone. I just opened the lid. There was no gasp, no theatrical music, just a folded letter, a wedding invitation, a USB drive, a silk ribbon, pale blue, and a photo. I didn't pick anything up. I didn't explain each item. I just looked at the group and said, "These are pieces of my life that were taken without permission." I saw movement in my periphery, Beckett's fingers tightening around the arm of his chair. Delaney lowered her gaze, not blinking. The room was still. 10 years ago, I continued, I was engaged. I thought I was building a future with someone who saw me. Really saw me. Even when I didn't believe in myself. I thought my best friend was my anchor. But the truth is, they were both waiting for the right moment to tip me overboard. I paused, let that sit. No one interrupted. Even the fire in the center of the circle seemed to quiet down. I brought this box because I didn't get to speak back then. No explanations. No apologies. Just silence. They got to move on with their story while I stayed buried in the ending they wrote for me. But I'm not buried anymore. Then I picked up the letter. This was the note she left. "You deserve someone who loves you fully. I just can't be that person." That's how she ended it. After 2 years together, that's all I got. I dropped the letter back in. This, I held up the photo, was taken at a restaurant I had recommended. It was meant to be where we celebrated our engagement dinner. I canceled the reservation after she left. But they didn't. They used it. They toasted there, smiling like everything had been theirs to begin with. Delaney finally spoke. Her voice was brittle. "Curtis, we didn't know you'd be here. This retreat, this isn't the place for truth." I cut in. Because that's what this circle is for, right? Radical honesty? Or is that only when it's convenient? I could feel the tension in the room twisting tighter with every second. Other participants were shifting, uncomfortable, but no one moved to stop me. Marva, to her credit, just nodded and said, "You're allowed to continue, Curtis." So I did. The USB, I said, contains a voicemail she left for her friend. It got sent to me by mistake. She was laughing. Not crying. Not confused. Laughing. Saying she felt free and that I'd bounce back because I was always too soft to stay broken. And maybe she was right. Maybe I was soft. Maybe I still am. But I'm not broken. And I'm not the one who has to lie to a room full of strangers to pretend I've healed. Beckett cleared his throat, tried to speak, but I raised a hand. You don't get to talk yet. And for once, maybe the first time in his life, he shut up. Everly wasn't in the circle. She was attending a meditation walk at the time, completely unaware of what was happening here. I had planned it that way. Not because I didn't want her support, but because I needed this moment to be mine. Mine alone. For once, I wasn't going to be quiet while other people rewrote the story. Marva asked gently, "What do you want from them now, Curtis?" I looked at Delaney. "I don't want anything from you." I looked at Beckett. "And from you? I want you to remember that when you took what didn't belong to you, you weren't stealing gold. You were stealing wreckage. You married the version of her that betrayed someone to get what she wanted. Good luck trusting that." I closed the box, stood up, and walked out. Didn't wait for applause. Didn't look back. And for the first time in 10 years, my footsteps didn't echo with regret. What I didn't know was that by the time the sun went down, someone else would open the box. And what they would find would flip this entire retreat inside out. I should have taken it back to the room. After everything that happened in the circle, after laying bare the pieces of the life they destroyed, I should have put the box back in my bag and locked it up. But I didn't. I left it sitting on the corner table near the tea station, too exhausted to care, too emotionally wrung out to imagine anything else happening that day. I thought it had served its purpose. I thought the box had spoken. But by the time I returned from a walk with Everly later that evening, it was gone. I stared at the empty spot for a full 10 seconds, blinking as if the box would reappear if I looked hard enough. But no, it was gone. I asked the staff. I checked with Marva. Nothing. No one had moved it. No one had even noticed it missing. It just vanished. I didn't say anything to Everly right away. She was still glowing from the mountain hike, sipping ginger tea, and talking about how much she liked the other guests, completely unaware that we were walking through a battlefield. I didn't want to ruin that for her. Not yet. So I smiled, nodded, and quietly retraced my steps to every spot I'd visited that day, as if the past could somehow be recovered like a misplaced jacket. Later that night, I found a folded note slid under our room door. The handwriting was unmistakable, soft, sharp cursive with the same lazy loop she used when signing thank you cards a decade ago. It was Delaney. "We need to talk. Alone. Tonight. Poolside. Midnight." My stomach sank. Every instinct screamed not to go. But I went anyway. She was already there when I arrived, barefoot, wrapped in one of those white resort robes, her hair twisted up like she hadn't tried too hard, which meant she absolutely had. The box sat between us on a towel, unopened. She didn't say anything at first. Just stared at the water, eyes glassy, fingers fidgeting with the ribbon that once tied the wedding favors we never used. Then she finally spoke. "I didn't know he took it." I stayed quiet. I wanted her to fill the silence, and she did. "He saw you with it after the session," she continued, not looking at me. "He asked questions. Got paranoid. Thought you had something dangerous. Something that could ruin us. I told him you didn't. But he didn't believe me. He took the box while you were walking. I only found out when he tried to open it in our room, and I threatened to leave if he didn't give it back. I let that settle. Beckett, the man who once promised he'd rather take a bullet than lie to me, had broken into my past like a thief in a museum, hoping to erase the evidence of what he'd done. What did you think was in it? I finally asked her. She took a long breath. Honestly, I thought maybe it was something from after. Something I never knew about. Some secret you'd held all this time. You always were quieter than I could stand. That stung more than I expected. I didn't bring it to hurt you, I said. I brought it because it was all I had left from before everything shattered. Delaney looked at me then. Really looked. You think I got everything I wanted. That I walked away and lived some fairy tale. But the truth is, Curtis, I haven't slept a full night in years. Every time I close my eyes, I wonder what kind of man I might have built a life with if I hadn't been so selfish. I offered. She nodded. Slowly. Yeah. There was a pause. Long and quiet and stupidly painful. The kind of silence that feels like it's dragging something sharp across your ribs. Then she whispered, "Do you still hate me?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to scream it. But the truth sat in my throat like a stone. "I don't know what I feel anymore," I said. But I do know that I don't want that box back. She blinked. You don't? No, I said, stepping back. Because whatever's inside, it belongs to who I used to be, not who I am now. I left her sitting there alone. The moon cast shadows across the water, and for a second, I thought about turning back. But I didn't. I walked back to my room, climbed into bed beside Everly, and wrapped my arm around her while she slept. She murmured something I couldn't understand and curled into me without question. But I couldn't sleep. Because even though I'd said I didn't care about the box, the next day it showed up again. Not in my room. Not on the table. But in the retreat's lost and found bin, missing one item. And it was not the USB. I stood there staring at the box like it had grown teeth. It was back, tucked neatly into the woven basket near the front desk, labeled Misplaced Belongings. The same smooth wood, the same quiet weight, the same uncomfortable history. But something about it felt off. I reached inside slowly, as if it might bite, and opened the lid. The letter was still there. The ribbon. The photo. Even the wedding invitation with the date that never arrived. But the USB was gone. I stood there in the lobby, heart thudding hard enough to blur my vision, trying not to let panic crawl into my throat. There were only two possibilities. Either someone had taken the drive, or someone had copied it. And both of those were terrifying. I didn't report it. Who would I tell? Marva? She already thought the emotional release I'd had at the circle was cathartic. The staff wouldn't have a clue. And telling Everly would mean explaining exactly what was on the drive and who it involved. I'd kept things vague on purpose, not because I wanted to lie, but because I hadn't been ready to see her face when I told her that the woman across the retreat courtyard once promised to grow old with me, and then ghosted me for the man she married a month later. I took the box back to our room, locked it in my suitcase, and spent the next few hours watching Everly sleep under one of those stupid weighted blankets she insisted we bring. Her face was peaceful, content, like she had no idea what kind of storm she was standing in the eye of. And that made it worse, because if the USB was in someone else's hands now, they weren't just going to use it against me. They might use it against her. And she didn't deserve that. Everly had saved me from myself. She never pressured, never pried, just stood beside me while I stitched myself back together, even when I was still bleeding all over the place. Around 4 a.m., unable to sleep, I stepped out to clear my head. The retreat was silent except for the soft hum of wind chimes and the occasional creak of floorboards and the wooden walkways between cabins. I didn't have a plan, just a headache and too many thoughts, but my feet moved anyway. I ended up outside the communal library, a glass-walled room full of throw pillows and organic teas and books with titles like Realigning Your Inner Voice and The Art of Surrendering Safely. It was dark, but someone was inside. A laptop screen glowed faintly across the room. I didn't knock. I walked in slow, quiet, a knot of dread coiling tighter with each step. Beckett sat there, alone, USB in hand. He looked up when he heard me but didn't flinch, didn't hide it. Just placed it on the table like it was a poker chip he was done bluffing with. You were right, he said flatly. There's a recording. I said nothing. My chest felt like it was filling with wet cement. She was laughing, he continued. I didn't remember that. I thought it was guilt, or maybe sadness. But she was laughing, telling her friend that it was the most thrilling thing she'd ever done. Like you were a page she'd finally torn out of her life's book. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see the man who had stolen from me. I saw someone hollowed out by the very thing he thought he'd won. Why are you showing me this? I asked. What do you want? Beckett leaned back in the armchair, eyes red but dry. I wanted to prove to myself that it wasn't as bad as I remembered. That she didn't really mean it. That maybe I wasn't just the next best option. But she was laughing, Curtis. She was laughing. He said the word like it burned. For a second, neither of us spoke. We just sat in the quiet, breathing the air of a decade-old mistake that had finally stopped pretending to be romantic. I didn't come here to ruin your life, I said finally. I didn't even know you two would be here. He nodded slowly. Then I guess it's fate. Or karma. Or something stupid like that. I reached out, took the USB from the table, and held it in my hand. I thought he might fight me for it, or try to make some threat. But he just looked tired. Like a man who finally read the last page of a book he shouldn't have started. As I stood to leave, he spoke one last time. She's not who I thought she was, he whispered. I turned to face him. Neither was I. Back then. Back in our room. Everly stirred as I climbed into bed. She mumbled, "You okay?" without opening her eyes. I hesitated. "I will be," I said. "I think I finally saw something clearly tonight." She nodded against the pillow and slipped back into sleep, peaceful as ever. But I didn't sleep. Because now I knew what was on the drive. And I knew Delaney didn't. And tomorrow, she was scheduled to give her healing speech to the entire retreat group. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with the recording. But for the first time in years, I held the power. The next morning came with one of those eerie mountain silences that feels almost rehearsed, like the trees and clouds and birds had all agreed to just pause and hold their breath. The retreat staff moved around quietly, setting up rows of chairs beneath the high glass dome that overlooked the hills. There was a podium, a sound system, a neatly printed banner that read, "Healing Through Vulnerability, Stories That Changed Us." Delaney's name was at the top of the program. Featured speaker. First slot. 10:30 sharp. I stared at that printout like it might combust in my hand. The woman who'd broken me in half and walked away like she was late for dinner was now about to stand in front of 50 people and talk about growth, pain, and love like she hadn't left mine behind in pieces. Everly was still in bed when I got dressed. She smiled sleepily and pulled the blanket up to her chin, her usual morning ritual. "You coming to the talks today?" she asked, stretching. "Yeah," I said. "There's something I need to hear. And something I needed them to hear." I kept the USB drive in the inside pocket of my jacket. It was light. Too light for something that carried the weight of an entire collapse. But it might as well have been a grenade. I transferred the voicemail recording to my phone just in case. Not to play it, not yet, but to know I could. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. Part of me still wanted to let it go, burn the whole thing to ash, and walk away like some Zen hero who'd transcended the pain. But another part, the part that still remembered how she smirked in that Paris photo while I was scraping myself off the floor, that part wanted her words to play loud enough that even the trees couldn't pretend not to hear them. By 10:15, the dome was full. Guests sat cross-legged or leaned back in folding chairs. The mood was hushed, reverent. Delaney stood near the podium, reading from a small notepad, lips moving silently. She looked polished, confident. A woman who had curated her story, sanded down the edges, turned every red flag into poetic reflection. Beckett sat in the back, slouched low, looking like he hadn't slept. When he saw me enter, he looked down. Didn't nod. Didn't blink. Marva stepped up and welcomed everyone, her voice calm and flowing like a river. "We're honored to begin this morning with one of our guests who has shown courage, clarity, and compassion in the face of personal transformation." Then she turned, gestured to Delaney. "Please welcome Delaney Cray." Delaney stepped up to the mic. There was polite applause. She smiled, that curated, graceful, upper-crust smile that used to convince me she knew who she was. And then she began. "I used to think love was about loyalty," she said. "About standing beside someone through everything. But sometimes love shows up wearing the wrong face, and you don't realize it's fear you're committing to, not connection." There it was, her opening hook. Polished. Strategic. Almost TED Talk ready. She talked about betrayal. Not the one she committed, of course, but the one she claimed to have suffered. A partner who shut down emotionally, who refused to grow, who clung to comfort like it was love. The phrases were elegant, ambiguous, designed to sound deep while saying nothing concrete. And the crowd nodded. They bought it. They always do. And I just sat there, quiet, hands folded in my lap, while she described me as a ghost who never learned how to live. Then it happened. From the back of the room, just as she was wrapping up her final paragraph, something about choosing joy over duty. A sound emerged. Soft at first, then louder. It was a voice. Her voice. Not the speech. The recording. That laugh. That casual, dismissive tone. He'll get over it. He always folds when things get real. There was a collective shift in the room, heads turning, confusion rising like a wave. The speaker system had picked up the file. Somehow, the Bluetooth connection had triggered and played the file stored on my phone. I hadn't touched it. I swear I hadn't. But her voice rang out again, clear, undeniable. It was fun, I'll admit. Lying to him. Watching him trust me even as I packed my bags for someone else. I know that makes me sound awful, but honestly, I felt alive for the first time in years. The silence that followed was awful. Even the leaves outside seemed to freeze mid-rustle. Delaney stood at the mic, eyes wide, frozen. Her face drained completely of color. Then she looked at me, and it wasn't confusion on her face. It wasn't outrage or fear. It was recognition. She knew. She knew this moment had been waiting for 10 years. And it had finally arrived. Marva rushed forward, fumbling to stop the sound, but the damage was done. People weren't nodding anymore. They were staring, stunned, recalibrating everything they'd just heard from her. Beckett stood up halfway, like he wanted to run, or speak, or scream. But he didn't. Delaney stepped back from the mic. Her hands trembled. She opened her mouth to say something. Anything, but no words came out. I stood slowly. I didn't say a word either. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in a decade, the truth spoke for me. For a long, long moment after the recording stopped, no one said a word. There was just that weird, suffocating air that comes after a car crash, where everyone's alive but too stunned to move. Delaney's jaw twitched like she was about to speak, but nothing came out. A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, others just staring at her with that mixture of pity and judgment people only reserve for those who fall from their pedestal in real time. I didn't know who had triggered the playback, if it was some Bluetooth mishap, or if Beckett had done it on purpose. All I knew was that her voice had finally betrayed her in a way I never could. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the pathetic one in the room. I wasn't the man left at the altar anymore. I was the man who outlasted the lie. Marva stepped up to the mic with this tight, panicked smile and said something about technical difficulties and let's all take a moment to reset, but no one moved. Everyone just kept watching Delaney. And then Beckett did something that made it all so much worse. He stood up, walked past everyone, didn't even glance at her, and walked right out the back doors. Not a word, not a pause, nothing, just gone. Delaney looked like someone had kicked the ground out from beneath her. She stared after him for a few seconds, then back at me. Her eyes weren't angry, they were hollow, like the mask had finally cracked, and all that was left behind it was a person who had spent 10 years pretending her empire wasn't built on betrayal. When she finally spoke, her voice was ragged. "Curtis," she said, but I shook my head. Not out of anger. I just didn't have it in me to hear whatever version of damage control she'd rehearsed in the mirror for a decade. "Don't," I said quietly. "Just don't." Everly appeared beside me seconds later. She must have heard the chaos from outside the dome. Her eyes darted between Delaney, the silent crowd, and me. "What's going on?" she whispered. I looked at her, and for a second, I panicked. This was the moment. The moment she'd learn everything. The woman I loved, the one who had never judged me, never pushed for answers, was about to be caught in the wreckage of a story she never asked to be part of. "We need to talk," I said. "Privately." She nodded. "No questions. Just trust." And that nearly broke me more than the betrayal ever had. We walked along the pine trail behind the retreat, far from the glass dome and the smoke of Delaney's story still burning to ash. I told her everything. Not just the wedding that never happened or the friend who turned out to be anything but. I told her about the voicemail, the box, the circle session, the missing USB. I didn't spare any detail. I owed her that. She didn't interrupt once. Just listened, face unreadable, hands in the sleeves of her jacket. When I finally stopped talking, I braced for the reaction, shock, anger, maybe even disgust. But what she said knocked the wind out of me in the most unexpected way. I knew. I blinked. "What?" "I didn't know it was them." "Exactly," she said. "But I knew there was more to the story. You flinched when I used the word betrayal early in our relationship. You got that far away look anytime someone mentioned weddings. And I've seen the way you look at that box when you think I'm not watching." She smiled, just a little. "I just figured when you were ready, you'd let it out." I sat down on a log and stared at the ground. "Why didn't you ever ask me to explain it all?" "Because you weren't built to be forced," she said. "You were built to leak slowly, painfully, in your own time." I laughed, a broken, hoarse sound, and wiped my eyes. Not because I was sad, not anymore, but because somehow I'd stumbled into the kind of love that waited without resentment. When we walked back toward the retreat, Delaney was gone. Not just from the dome, from the retreat entirely. Her cabin had been cleared. The front desk staff said she'd chosen to leave early due to a family emergency, which was retreat speak for humiliation can't be healed over herbal tea and breath work. Beckett wasn't at dinner either, and no one seemed particularly interested in asking where they'd gone. Later that night, I returned to the library, the same place I'd found Beckett with the USB, and opened my laptop. I thought I'd feel triumphant, vindicated, powerful, but I didn't. I just felt still, quiet, like something inside me had been untied and was finally drifting out to sea. I clicked on the file one last time, not to listen, but to delete it. For real this time. No backups, No copies. Just gone. And then, as I sat in that empty room with the firelight flickering against the glass, Everly entered, wrapped in a blanket, holding 2 mugs of tea. "Is it over?" she asked. I nodded. "It is now." But the truth? Something else was still coming. Because the retreat had 1 more day left. And on that final day, the organizers decided to switch things up and asked me to speak. They said people wanted to hear my version of the story, and what I said next would ripple far beyond anything Delaney ever imagined. The final day of the retreat arrived shrouded in soft fog and a strange calm, like the mountain itself was giving us all permission to start again. Word had spread. No one said anything out loud. Of course, this was a healing space, after all, but you could feel it in the way people glanced at me over breakfast, the way conversations paused when I walked by. It wasn't scandal they were clinging to. It was something else. Maybe curiosity. Maybe hope. Maybe they wanted to see what a man looked like after surviving the kind of emotional demolition most people don't crawl back from. Marva approached me after breakfast, wearing that same serene expression she always wore, like everything was both on fire and completely under control. "We'd like you to close the retreat," she said gently. "You don't have to talk about them. Just speak from where you are now." At first, I hesitated. I'm not a speaker. I'm a chronic overthinker, a man who mumbles apologies before he finishes full thoughts. But something about this felt right, like the kind of chapter you don't plan for, but know you have to write before the story can move on. So, later that afternoon, I stood under the glass dome, the chairs half full, the air fragrant with cedar and lemongrass oil, and I told my truth. Not about the betrayal, not about the years of quiet suffering or the box or the USB. I told them about shame, how it burrows into your ribs and wears your name like a costume, how it makes you believe your worth is determined by someone else's decisions, and how it took me 10 years to understand that being left didn't mean I was unlovable. It just meant I was no longer convenient to someone who mistook love for control. I talked about Everly, not as a prize or a rescue, but as a partner. How she never asked me to be anyone other than the man I was trying to become. How she taught me that healing doesn't look like a grand revelation. It looks like making coffee in the morning without flinching. It looks like walking past your past and not needing to look back. And then I said something I hadn't planned. I used to want an apology. From both of them. I thought it would make the pain worth it. But standing here now, I don't. Because if they hadn't done what they did, I wouldn't have met the woman who doesn't just love me, she sees me. And I wouldn't have learned that forgiveness isn't a gift you give to someone else. It's what you hand yourself when you're finally ready to stop bleeding for people who never brought a bandage. When I finished, the room stayed silent. No clapping, no tears, just stillness. And it was enough. Later that evening, while everyone packed to leave, Beckett approached me. He didn't say much, just offered a quiet. I listened. Then he paused and added, "She left. I don't know where she went. I think she's running from herself now." I nodded, unsure what to say. We weren't friends anymore. We never would be. But for the first time, I didn't hate him. I just didn't care. And that, weirdly, felt like freedom. Everly and I drove down the mountain with the windows cracked and the radio low. She reached over and took my hand. I turned to look at her, and she smiled without needing a reason. And I realized, I've been waiting years for someone to understand the version of me that still trembled when doors closed too hard or when someone said they needed space. She never tried to fix those parts. She just stayed. A month after the retreat, I burned the box. Everything inside. The letter. The photo. The ribbon. Even the invitation. I didn't need a shrine to pain anymore. I didn't need reminders of who I'd been left by. I was too busy living with the woman who chose me fully, freely, without condition. And as I watched the last corner of that paper curl into smoke and float into the night, I whispered something out loud. Thank you for leaving. Because that was the day I finally arrived.